I just thought, right, well, given my background, given that I am now up for taking risks, one of the worst things has happened to me already. So, and I want to do something very different with the next 20 years. Like, why not? If not me, then why not me?
On today's episode of Careers Unwrapped, I'm really excited to have with me Laura Harnett, who's the founder of Seep, a brilliant company dedicated to transforming the cleaning products market with sustainable innovations. Recently featured on Dragon's Den, and we'll come on to that. Now, Laura's career spans so much: major retailers, consultancy, investment, and much more. And she's also a passionate advocate for female entrepreneurs and founders. So I don't know how we're going to fit all of this into one conversation today, but hopefully Laura's going to share her experiences building Seep, her insights maybe on her viewpoint around entrepreneurship and investment, and also what just keeps driving her on. So welcome to the show, Laura.
Thank you so much for having me on.
I think, first of all, the name of your business, Seep, where did that come from? What was the inspiration and background to that?
So my husband's a doctor, and he absolutely loves acronyms. He thinks all acronyms are great. I don't necessarily agree, but I was thinking about the business, and we were on holiday, and I was like, what can I call it? And he said, sustainable, everyday, essential products. And then what he hadn't actually realized was that it spelt Seep at the time. And then I was like, Seep. And then it's 4 letters, which I really love. It actually represents kind of the circularity of our product, that all of our kind of sponges and cloths are designed to break down at the end of life and get into the soil. So, and it works, it seeps into your everyday routine. So actually it works on quite a few levels. But yeah, he inspired it basically.
I remember actually the first grown-up business I was starting, and a one-off conversation with a friend. He was like, "Oh, we should call it National Schools Partnership." And I said, no, we have to do this process properly. And so we sort of mapped out the audiences and what we thought they would get out of it. And we came out with different directions, did the brand, did the work. And ultimately, after a couple of weeks of extra work, it was called National Schools Partnership. We could have saved a lot of time and effort with that. And now I'm interested really about how your career led you to this point, because you've had exposure to many businesses and different sectors. And how did this area, sustainable cleaning products, clean products that are designed not to damage the environment, how did you get to that point, that market, that product?
I think it all makes sense when you look back, but obviously you don't design it that way from the start, which I think is interesting. So I grew up in South Wales, and I went to this for the last 2 years at sixth form. I went to this, it's been described as Hogwarts for hippies. It's a school called Atlantic College, and it basically makes, the thesis is that people, if you give kids great sort of exposure to the issues in the world, and you learn with each other from people from all over the world, then you can go on and change the world. So that was kind of fed my kind of wanting to do something that was a bit more mission driven. I then went and had a sort of pretty traditional career, I guess. So I kind of put all that aside and started off as a buyer for Compass Group. So I was, I was learning all about how to strike a deal, sort of source product, negotiate margins. Then went into consulting. Again, it was all kind of consumer and retail businesses. And then went kind of from consulting into operator side. Again, it just felt like a sort of fairly logical route. Never, ever thought I would set up my own business. It was, I was raised, my parents worked for the local authority, and one was a teacher. No one in my family were entrepreneurs. It was the sort of thing that I was told was the most risky thing I could possibly do. It was the thing that, like only if you were mad or had lots of money to burn. But actually, I got to a point where I went through some, I was basically diagnosed with breast cancer in my late 30s. It gave me this wonderful moment of pause. Obviously, it's not wonderful, but it gave me the space. And I described sleep as my silver lining. I spotted the opportunity in the market because I wanted to reduce the amount of toxins in my kitchen and my house. The only thing I couldn't seem to swap was the kind of washing up sponges, those horrible green and yellow ones. And I had to find, it was really hard to find some. I then sort of waited for somebody else to come along and do it, and no one did. And I just thought, right, well, given my background, given that I am now up for taking risks, one of the worst things has happened to me already. So, and I want to do something very different with the next 20 years. Like, why not? If not me, then why not me? And so that's, so it all makes sense when you look back. But it felt really, really scary at the time.
And you say this felt scary, but obviously at the time you were thinking about it, you were dealing with something that was just a lot more scary in terms of your breast cancer there. Do you think that if you hadn't had that forced time out, you would still have got the business going?
No, honestly, no. And I went through my treatment. I was working at Selfridges at the time. They're an iconic retailer. They were fantastic. I went back to Selfridges after my treatment, but that kind of moment of pause, you just lose the fear of so much. Before I had this huge fear of ever losing my job, of ever running out of money, or so it was always keep your head down, work hard, and you'll be fine. You'll make it through to retirement. And then something like this happened. Sort of something like some health issue happens, and that fear, which I think really holds you back doing something a bit more risky, sort of disappears. And so I really don't think I would be doing what I'm doing now if it wasn't for it. And so it's in sort of ironically, I regret, I wish I'd never had it, but in some ways it was.
Yeah. I'd been at a much lower level. I had been managing director of two businesses, and then I was made redundant from the second one of them. And that's the point at which I started up my first business after that. And I do wonder sometimes if that redundancy hadn't happened, if I'd have had the bravery with two children at the time, and my wife soon pregnant with our third. I wonder if I'd have had the bravery to make the jump from a solid job paying a good salary to doing something on my own. So whilst I can't remember what you went through on a health level, I do have an understanding a little bit of that trigger, that break, that forced activity. Do you think, having gone through and come out the other end of those health challenges as well, it's made you different in any form as a leader, as a manager, as somebody who deals with other people? Because obviously it was a big change in your life in terms of career and direction and setting up your own business. What about you as a career person as well?
I think that was more about the move from corporate, so from working in big corporates and all of the kind of governance and long decisions take and the kind of atmosphere that typically is in a big business, which incremental changes. So I think that was, that's very much how I was as trained, in all of my roles. It was very much, problem solving, but, you've got to get consensus and sign off for these decisions. And, you're eking out the percentages, right? There's, from every year, and don't stick your neck out too much because you might get noticed, and make sure that. So I think that was what I was used to working with. And, I think I was pretty good at operating in that environment, but it does close your brain. It does make you less brave and not necessarily see sort of some really quite big opportunities alongside, because that's just not, that's not how these big juggernauts work. And then becoming, I think I have changed, so when you got, a budget of £2.50 as I'm exaggerating, very little sort of money, team, I've learned how to hustle very late in my career. And, I'm always trying to think about how can I extract something out of an opportunity. And and it probably drives my team mad. I'm always going like, but did you ask if we can get a bigger discount? And so I think it has changed how I operate and probably how I manage the team as well.
I think it's interesting listening to how you've described some of the skills you need now as ones you were helped with in your early career. So things like deal making and margin negotiation. And then other things you've had to learn after corporate life, like that sense of hustling. What are the other skills that you think the corporate life gave you that actually have been an asset in going your own way with Seep?
I think there's so much that I've learned. And so, basic things like project management, it was a kind of art, there was a huge team that we had in Selfridges that was kind of managing this huge program, hundreds of people, with spreadsheets and trackers and identifying the kind of key critical points and the decisions. And, actually it's exhausting working in that kind of environment. But actually if you could take a small element of that and put it into startup life, actually it is quite good to have some sort of structure. So, we're looking at how we launch into Amazon Europe at the moment. It's actually quite complicated, like certifications do we need, like tax, translations. And actually, if you're just going at it sort of fairly randomly, trying to problem solve, it's quite hard to get forward momentum. Whereas I think project management in its simplest form, I think is a very useful skill set, particularly when you're trying to make something happen. I think communication, that has been massively important. So how do you sell an idea? That's something that I've had to do at all the stages in my career, especially in consulting. You're often you're being brought in because they don't know the answer to something, or it's too tricky to land with a board. So you're often brought in to come up with all the evidence and get a decision over the line. And so I think that has come in helpful when I'm raising money, so sort of raising investment. How do I pitch, and so, in corporate life, it's an idea or a project, and now it's the sort of entire business.
Yeah. I think like you, I set up my main businesses after having gained experience working in other environments, some of them very different, like the army, and others in sort of medium-sized businesses. But I'm often left quite in awe when on this program, I interview people who started their business from scratch, age 22, 23, without any of that experience to go back on. It's amazing.
It's this kind of gut feeling that, having been through lots of scenarios where things have gone wrong, a stock consignment hasn't turned up, or the website stopped working. I have an inner sense, or I have a sort of, I guess, healthy skepticism that something is probably not going to work. And I think that has also evolved. And I'm always amazed that. So I'm probably, in a way, it probably also holds me back now. I'm worried that already see or foresee the things that could go wrong. And so sometimes I think that's probably something that makes me less brave than someone who probably hasn't seen it in their 20s.
Yeah, and maybe on the flip side, gives you a slightly higher chance of getting the decision right as well. It's all a balance. It's all a tricky balance. You mentioned investment. How did Seep start from an investment perspective? Where did the initial money come from to get the first few years momentum going?
So initially it was my money. And so I think that's one of the huge advantages of being a slightly old, not slightly, I am an older founder, right? I set up Seep in my late 30s, early 40s. And so I had money that I'd sort of very diligently put aside, saved every year. And so I could, that's what I used initially. And then, some very kind family members also then chipped some money in, which again, I recognize not everyone has that they, that they can turn to their parents or whatever to put a bit of money into their business. But that was, that's what ultimately gave me the opportunity to kind of put my first order in, hire my first person to help, and that's why I feel like, there's a lot of people out there that, actually there's the people that start with nothing, don't even have seed, but they've started so small and then have built. I've just so much respect for them.
You must have therefore had conversations with your own, you mentioned your husband a moment ago, conversations with him that, okay, the money that we've saved, that I've saved, that maybe set aside for the rainy day future, or there are plans for it, we're going to use it, and we're going to use it on sustainable cleaning products.
On a batch of sponges.
How much was just the backing was just there, and how much was, right, there's an internal business plan, and actually this is going to be my hardest audience of all, because this is money that, we've saved in the family?
So, I mean, my husband's unbelievably supportive and is the most positive person I think I've ever met.